Good afternoon, and welcome to the College of Business Thought Leadership Series, your front row seat to the ideas, research, and conversations shaping the future of business and beyond. We're so glad you're here with us today, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm Kate Popinsick, Assistant Director of Advancement for the College of Business, where I oversee alumni and volunteer engagement initiatives. It's a pleasure to be with you today to serve as your host for this session of the Thought Leadership Series. Dr. Jay Hardy will guide today's conversation, drawing on his research expertise to ask thought-provoking questions we know are on your minds. He'll explore the topic in a way that's both insightful and accessible, offering perspectives you can take with you beyond today's session. We will save plenty of time for you to join in on the conversation today. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions, share reflections, and dive deeper into the ideas that resonate most with you. As today's discussion unfolds, I encourage you to jot down anything that sparks your curiosity. Your questions will help make the Q&A portion of today's event lively. Before we get started, I want to share a few quick Zoom webinar tips. All attendees here with us today are muted, and the video is turned off by default. The Zoom toolbar is at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, move your cursor. Please note, for some devices like iPads, it may appear at the top. Please submit all content-related questions through the Q&A box. We encourage you to contribute and help shape today's discussion. The chat feature is reserved for technical support or general event questions. Our team will monitor it, but content questions on today's research should go into the Q&A to keep things organized. We'll wrap up promptly at 1 p.m. to ensure we stay on schedule. And with that, I'm excited to turn things over to Dr. Jay Hardy. As Associate Dean of Research, Jay is dedicated to advancing our research mission and fostering a strong culture of academic excellence here in the College of Business.
Welcome. Today, we're joined by Dr. Colleen Pokorny, an assistant professor of apparel design in the Oregon State University College of Business. Colleen is a lifelong quilter and an accomplished scholar in apparel design, having spent years before her time at OSU as a technical designer in the fashion industry. Her research here at OSU reframes sustainable design, starting with the material itself. Her recent work has been recognized with 2 pieces accepted to the ITAA Design Exhibition, a quilt selected for exhibition at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky, and a quilt selected for the American Quilt Study Group's biennial exhibition, Quilt Makers and Designers, 1945 through 1979. She also recently earned first and third place at the 2025 Oregon State Fair and third at the 2025 Oregon Quilt Festival. She's graciously agreed to join us today to talk about how a materials-first mindset can create better products, stronger communities, and real business value. Colleen, thank you for being here today. Let's start with the big picture and then work into your model and impact. So start by setting the stage for us. How do you approach your scholarship at the intersection of design and business? And what are some examples of some problems that you're working on?
So I think of design as sort of the core of business. If we don't have a design or a good design product, we don't have a business. So to me, I see them as intertwined. And so my scholarship really builds on my experience in the fashion industry, where I firsthand saw the power of how business can, design and business can drive each other and how they go together. So in terms of my scholarship, I work on things mostly involving the design process. So looking at sustainable design processes and materials. So as we're going to talk about today, upcycling quilts as a design model and a design process, and what does that mean for maybe these small entrepreneurs who are working with these quilts and upcycling them into garments, and then like implications on society and our culture. Also looking at other textiles that are sustainable, like hemp textiles, and how do we integrate those into our curriculum to build better apparel designers in the future. I also look at things like AI for design ideation. So how AI can impact our design workflows and ideation within a variety of different spaces. And then sort of the last thing I work on is innovations in craft. So how innovations in a craft space are developed specifically through the lens of quilt making. And then, because a lot of these innovations develop through entrepreneurs or smaller businesses. And so then how do those innovations impact designs as well as design processes?
Great. A lot of really interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the model. Before we get too into the details, as I mentioned in our introduction, you spent years before your time at OSU working as a technical designer, and you were a lifelong quilter. I talked about some of your quilts earlier on. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how that combination helps you notice things that others might miss in sustainable design.
Yeah, so let me explain what a technical designer is if you're not familiar with it. So in the fashion industry, we have designers who kind of come up with the concepts and are driving sort of the product forward. Technical designers, I like to think of as apparel engineers. That's actually would be a better name for us. So we're the ones who turn these designs into reality. We work with the factories to get things produced. And so this gives me a really strong attention to detail, and I understand how to navigate and balance out the needs of a designer in terms of what they're looking for in aesthetics, and then the needs of the business. How do I produce this product at the cost that's being required of me? So that gives me a really strong understanding of design from an industry standpoint. But then as a quilter, I have this understanding of what does it mean to make and design in a very slow space, and something that takes a lot of time and a lot of intention and sort of working hands-on with your materials, how to value time and labor and materials. And so that's like a little bit different end of the spectrum. So I kind of combine those two things to get more of a holistic view of sustainable design, coming at it from both sort of the big picture industry standpoint, but also sort of that smaller intentionality making standpoint.
Sitting at the intersections of two very different motivations, it's a tough line to sometimes walk. Let's talk about upcycling. This comes up a lot in your work. For those that are new to it, that was including me before getting to know you, what does upcycling mean, specifically in the context of quilts and apparel, and why has this specifically captured your attention?
Yeah, so my research involved looking at designers who were upcycling quilts and turning them into fashion garments. So I use a definition of upcycling from a scholar named Alice Payne, and she has a book called Designing Fashion's Future, Present Practice, and Tactics for Sustainable Design. And so she defines upcycling as when an object that is considered disposable is transformed into a newer product with higher value than the old. So taking something that's no longer functional in its current state and transforming it into something that now has purpose or value. And then I also look at upcycling under this broader umbrella in textiles and clothing of slow fashion, which was a term coined by a scholar, Kate Fletcher. And this emphasizes small-scale production, traditional craft-making techniques, and local production and consumption. So for me, I look at upcycling secondhand quilts or these discarded quilts, how designers are doing that. And a lot of these are entrepreneurs, so it has definitely a business impact. It captured my attention because it's, there is historic precedence for this. We've always upcycled our things. We just didn't call it upcycling. It was just called reusing and mending and repurposing things. But my attention for this was captured by the fact that in 2020-ish, this sort of came back up as a thing that a lot of people were doing. A lot of small entrepreneurs were starting to upcycle quilts and make these garments and sell them. And I'd see them on Instagram and I'd see them on Etsy. And there was like a lot of controversy. The comments pages were like full of people being like, no, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Like, how dare you do this? And then a lot of people saying, oh, this is so cool. I can't believe you're doing this. So that part, that like controversy, that there's something here that is causing people to react, that is what really got me interested in wanting to look at this phenomenon even more and find out what is sort of happening here.
Yeah, I mean, in your definition, you use the word disposable. I can imagine for some folks who put a lot of time and energy into their craft, that could be a very emotionally laden thing. So this is a very fascinating tension that you're operating in, and I understand it's a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different sides. I'm curious, was there a moment as you were working on this project that made you think that there was a deeper research story beyond just the trend headline?
Yeah, so what kind of kicked all of this off for me was actually a project I did in my graduate studies where I looked at this Ralph Lauren sweater. This is what you're seeing on the screen. So this is a cardigan sweater from a Ralph Lauren collection that he did in 1982. And this sweater is at the Goldstein Museum of Design at the University of Minnesota. That's where I did my graduate studies. And so I had a professor approach me and say, hey, I've got something I think you might be interested in. You love to study historic costume. You love quilts. Here's this garment, you need to look at it and find out more about it. So I researched into this collection that Ralph Lauren did in the 80s, and he purchased about 300 quilts from dealers around the country. They were all dated to around 1890. He cut them up, turned them into garments like you see here. So there were sweaters and there were some skirts that were made from quilts. They did a runway show, and then they were sold in stores all over the country. And there was a lot of controversy about this in the 80s, people being very upset with him. So I studied this sweater and kind of learned a little bit about it. I did a presentation on it, and I thought, that's the end of that. I'm gonna go and do something else. And then someone pulled me aside and said, no, you need to keep going. I have been selling quilts to this designer who is doing this currently, and I think there's a story to this. At the same time, a video came out on YouTube, and it was all about, don't do this. This is the worst thing ever. Do not cut up quilts to make garments. And it caused the quilt making internet to blow up, which yes, that it does exist. People were very upset, and this video caused a lot of controversy on both sides. And so that was sort of this oh, there's historic precedence to this, but this is also happening now, and we need to capture what is going on now with it. Sustainability is a big topic. But what I found interesting about this is that everyone was talking about should you or should you not, but nobody was talking to the designers. And so that's where I got interested, was well, what does it mean to be a designer in this space who's actually working with these objects? What does it mean to cut one up and to use it? How does it feel to be a designer? So that is the space that I wanted to explore, was to bring that voice to this story that maybe had been forgotten or had just not been explored yet.
Yeah, great. Yeah, materials. It's very central to the work that you're doing here. So let's talk about this design process that you observed as you started to get into this. When you start with a focus on the material, how does that change the early decisions that a designer makes?
Yeah. So what everyone's going to see on the screen are actually some of the images from the designers that I interviewed. So these are some of their garments, and a lot of times it includes a photo of the original quilt. So you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about and what these designers did. So I interviewed about 17 designers about this, and they talked a lot about this process of starting with their material as the basis for everything that they did. So in a traditional apparel design model, we talk about consumers and target markets, right? And that's what we're designing for, is to solve some sort of need for a consumer. And we go through this sort of iterative process of prototyping and evaluating, and then we eventually make it. And the designer and their materials, yes, they're part of it, but they're not the heart of the process. What I found when I talked to these designers is that they're really doing something new and different. It's a relationship between themselves and the material. They're starting with the material, which is the quilt. In this case, they form a relationship with it, and that is what guides their process, not the consumer. That's not the end goal. The end goal is to really use this quilt in a way that, celebrates its best and transforms it into a new life. So I think when you talk about early in the design process, it's about getting to know the quilt, and that is what drives the further decisions and the further parts of the process.
Right. So we're kind of talking very broadly in this designer material space. You describe a designer material relationship in your work. At a high level, kind of explain to us what it is. How does it help us answer that question of what it is that the designers are doing when they're working on this topic?
Yeah, so from my research, I developed this model that I call the designer material relationship model, and this is a conceptual framework. So at the heart of this, we see designer and quilt and sort of these arrows that connect them. So they are really acting upon one another in this design process of upcycling and looking at these quilts. And then in the outer ring, we see two interdependent components, so emotional response and aesthetic response. And these are the things that the designer is wrestling with, these tensions that they are dealing with when they're trying to decide how to design with this quilt. Is they're having these sort of emotional responses and these aesthetic responses to the quilt that drives their design decisions. So I think this helps us to really visualize a little bit what these designers in the sustainability space are kind of going through and how they're working through things, what are sort of the inputs to their decision making. It also kind of reframes the design process to be focused more on materials and the designer as opposed to consumers, and acknowledging the role that a designer and their materials play in the design process.
Great. Yeah. So let's talk about this model a little bit more. In simple terms, what constitutes the emotional response to a material? What constitutes the aesthetic response? How do these two things come together when we're thinking about this in practice?
So emotional response would be the designer's feelings of like reverence towards the quilt that they're working with, or hesitation to cut it up, or the responsibility they feel towards turning this quilt into a new valuable object. There was positive emotions of like, oh, I'm so excited about what I was able to do with this, as well as negative emotions about like, oh, I'm really scared to cut into this. I don't want to ruin this. It's a finite resource. There's only one of them. So I would get things like personifying these quilts as they would talk about their process, talking about wanting to evolve them, about potentially hurting the quilt, about the quilt having a soul. One of the designers, Lorelei, talked about one of the quilts she worked with having bad karma. And so after she cut it up and made a garment out of it, she had to quarantine that garment because she didn't want it to like infect the other garments and quilts in her house. And she had to like sweep up all the scraps and like dispose of them because it didn't had like bad feelings with it. Yeah. This is sort of also driven by the quilts being handmade. So the designers are reacting to sort of being able to connect with the maker of the quilt. So this sort of temporal connection over time with like love and labor and emotion. And that, there's like this emotional weight to these quilts as they work with them. In terms of aesthetic response, this is more what we're used to in a design process, right? Looking at the material and deciding how do I want to use this material? What makes the most sense? How can I utilize the design elements to make my garment? Oftentimes, maybe they would try to maintain design details like the binding and use that to finish the edge of their garment as opposed to cutting it off and adding a new binding. Or the size of the quilt dictating the size of the garment, right? You can only make a garment so big depending on the size of the quilt. One person did toddler size clothing, so her quilt patterns that she would try to source had to be small. If you had a big graphic element, well, it's gonna not work on a toddler size garment. And then the last one is about mending and repair. A lot of these quilts come with damage or signs of life, wear over time. And so the designers talked about having responses to that and wanting to maintain that in their garments in some way to kind of bring that story to life as it goes into its new life. And connecting to historic repair culture and trying to get consumers to continue that act of repair over time.
Yeah, a lot of really kind of interesting anecdotes and experiences that come out as you consider all the things that go both into the production of the quilt as well as the production of the garment themselves. So I'd be curious to hear if anything surprised you as the model took shape, especially when you compare it to the standard consumer-first design approaches that focus primarily on the aesthetics.
Yeah, so emotion, that was the big surprising thing. I didn't know that I was gonna find that at all. But as I talked to these designers, this like level of emotion that came out of their work was so surprising to me. And I think that's why it was so surprising. As someone who's worked in the apparel industry, we're actually taught to remove emotion from the process. You don't ever wanna fall in love with the design because inevitably it's gonna get cut. It's going to get changed. Somebody's going to come tell you it's the worst thing they've ever seen. And so if you are emotionally attached to your designs, you're opening yourself up to just like, it's not a good feeling, right? You want to like not be attached to them so that you can survive as a designer. But these designers were incredibly emotionally attached to their objects, to the quilts. They used that emotion in their design process to really intentionally move forward with the final garment. So to me, this like piece of emotion really shows the power of understanding like why and how we design as opposed to like who and what we're designing for. It kind of shifts that focus elsewhere.
So this is a mindset that you teach in your classes. When your students begin with the material and design with intentions, what shift do you see in their process or their outcomes? And how does that fit with what employers want?
Yeah. So we focus on sustainability a lot in the classroom here at Oregon State, especially integrating like natural dyes and natural fibers into our work. We don't necessarily focus on upcycling, but we do talk about the importance of materials in the design process. So for example, we had this student here, Lucas, who was really interested in working with hemp textiles and natural fibers. And this is a performance wear line, but he wanted to use natural fibers. So this really drove him to think about different ways of coloring his fabrics, so using natural dyes, as well as how to finish them appropriately. So he wanted a water repellent jacket, but he didn't want to use Gore-Tex and he didn't want to use PFAS. shafts because it didn't fit with the material ethos of his line. So he kind of went back and learned about historical waxing techniques to wax his jacket so that it could be water repellent. So it's a good example of how being really focused on what your intention is with your materials kind of drives the entire design process and resulted in this really cool and innovative line that he did. I have another example of another student, Ruby. Her collection that she did last year was all from upcycled bed sheets, and it fit with her whole line of, it was called A Day of Rest, and was inspired by sort of like women's labor kind of always being overlooked. And so she used bed sheets as her material, which sort of drove the entire line. It also dictated her design process. You only have so much of a bed sheet. You're limited to like what color you find at the store and what print. So she had to work around a lot of those constraints. But I think it kind of really drove a really interesting line for her by starting with her material. From an employer standpoint, I think they're looking for designers with a unique point of view and who understand sustainability and materials. So I think, having students be able to understand these really helps make them more like marketable once they get out into the industry.
Yeah, they're problems to be solved, right?
Yes.
When you're operating through a particular perspective, you're going to have to work within the constraints that perspective can provide. And that's a valuable skill for our students. Thank you. So we mentioned this earlier, right? The upcycling conversation can sometimes get a little spirited. I've talked to you about this before. You see strong cases on both sides. What would you consider to be the strongest case for transforming quilts and the strongest case for preserving them? And how do you navigate that space as a scholar and a maker yourself?
So the case for preserving them is obviously that quilts are a record of history, and especially they're a record of women's history, which is often understudied or not recorded at all. And they're also the history of fabric, of innovation, of technology, of social connections, of community, of techniques. So they record so much in them. And once we cut up a quilt, you've kind of severed that link between the quilter and the quilt. We can no longer connect them back together as easily. We've lost sort of the provenance and the story. There's also some concerns, like if we talk about Ralph Lauren, of Ralph Lauren co-opting a woman's craft and turning it into sort of male profit, right? So there's issues with that. The flip side for transforming them is, well, nobody was using this quilt and nobody wanted it, so I've turned it into something somebody now can use and want. A lot of these designers, they're getting these quilts they go to Goodwill. They go to the Goodwill bins and get the quilt out of the bin where if they didn't get it from there, it was about to go get incinerated or sent to a textile recycling center or be destroyed. Or they're getting them from, a thrift sale, an antique sale, a garage sale, something that nobody was wanting. And so they've been able to transform it into something with a new life. They can't go out and buy a quilt that's $300 because then the garment you have to sell is going to be so expensive, nobody's going to purchase it. So from a business standpoint, thrifting is where you have to start in order to have like a low cost material to make money as well. But also for transforming it is sort of like, well, I bought it, it's my quilt. I get to decide what I want to do with it. Who are you to say what I can do with this? The other thing is this is really a continuation of that historic act of repairing, of mending, of transforming something. So historically, we've transformed quilts or materials into quilts and into other things. This is just a continuation of that process.
Yeah, it's a time-old tension between tradition and sustainability,
Yes.
the past and the future.
Yes.
There's a lot that's baked into that conversation, and there's really no right answers. And I think maybe one way that we can help kind of bridge some of that gap comes to my next question here. Some of your projects that you work on build community around handcraft. What have you learned about the role of making connection, well-being, and curriculum?
So anybody who's out there that makes things understands that there's a lot of power to making things in terms of positive well-being. I use my quilt making as my stress release to survive grad school and survive a lot of things. This is sort of how my sort of outlet. But one example is a project I worked on with two of our other faculty in apparel design, Marianne Dixon and Dr. Balanli Downsey. And we collaborated to make a garment from scraps. Actually, I brought a sample with me because I don't have the garment, to make a garment from sample scraps from our program. These are all natural dyed, they're hemp fabrics, and we would meet weekly to lay down these scraps and to hand stitch them together. And we would talk and we would share. And we were trying to address sort of academic loneliness. You know, Jay, it's very lonely to be a researcher sometimes. For women, it's a lot harder for us. So we did this intentionally to find a way to come together as a program and to meet and to share. And there is something about hand stitching or doing something repetitive where your subconscious is working on it and it frees up your conscious mind to have amazing conversations and to talk and to go places you didn't know you could go. So we actually were able to kind of develop a new class from this that Marianne will be teaching in the future about sort of craft and activism. And so that was really cool and really powerful to see. We also did this in the studio where our students were working. And so they saw firsthand their professors coming together to meet and to work and to share. And I think that really inspired them to understand the power of craft together and the power of how that can positively impact sort of well-being and social situations.
That sounds great. Yeah, community, culture, connection. There's a lot of really great benefits. I actually didn't know about this. This is a fantastic initiative. I'm glad that you guys are working on that. So designers have a lot of new tools now. A lot of what we talk about here at OSU revolves around AI. And you've worked in this space as well. In your experience with AI for quilt design, I'd be curious to learn from you how it opens up creativity, where it can overwhelm, where it helps you use, and how you can use AI with intention.
Yeah. I think it's a little ironic that I also work in an AI space because it's not typically seen as sustainable, but I see it fitting under that umbrella of innovation of craft. Yeah. So I have been using AI to develop quilts, and you can see two of them in here. This one and this one are from that project. And so I challenged myself to use AI to design a quilt for a specific challenge. I had to use 6 colors for it. I started prompting in Midjourney, and the images you see on the screen are some of my early trials in Midjourney where it didn't really understand what I was doing, and it was giving me weird options, and I got stuck in this horrible ideation spiral of constantly prompting, and not getting anywhere. Eventually, I shifted to thinking not about quilts, but about the graphic elements. And I moved into prompting for tiles. I don't know, that just made sense to me. So I started prompting for mid-century modern tiles, and I started getting someplace that was more sort of, oh, I think I could work this into a quilt. This actually translates. So then what happened next is I took an image from Midjourney, and I took a portion of it and decided this is the part that I'm going to use. And what I want to impart on people as I go through this is, yes, I have an image here from Midjourney, but it took years and years of knowledge and experience to turn that into the quilt that is behind me. So I'll show a little bit about what that next part of that process was. I took my image to Photoshop, another program for technology. I mocked up hundreds of color options to find out what colors were going to work best. Then I took the one I liked into Illustrator, and I made to scale mock-up in Illustrator and started to turn this into reality so I could turn it into an actual quilt. This involved doing a lot of math. Quilts are math, surprisingly. Most people don't know this. And then I started making my patterns. So you can see on our next slide should be the patterns that I had worked on. So this looks crazy for a lot of people, I realize this, but these are actual patterns that I made to turn this quilt into reality. So AI can't tell me how to do this. This relies on my personal knowledge and years of experience in quilt making and apparel design to create this. And then I had to figure out how to put it together. AI can't tell me how to construct this. It has no idea how to do that. So then the final result that I got, as you can see, going from my original image, the part I selected, sort of my test run, which I used to test my construction, made lots of mistakes, and then my final quilt. So AI has a lot of power, and it's really great for design ideation, but it can't do everything. And so you can prompt over and over and get so many different ideas, and that in itself is almost limiting because you get sort of stuck in this like, well, how do I pick which one? So I kind of had to really step back and think about intentionally, like, what was my design goal and how can I best use AI to get me sort of where I want to go? And then I needed years of experience to turn it into reality. So people say AI is cheating. I don't think this is cheating because it couldn't have gotten me there. Like, I am the one who got me to that end product.
Yeah, AI as a tool rather than the end all. It's very evident in this process.
Yes, it's a great tool.
Fantastic outcome that maybe you wouldn't have ever come up with before. So fantastic. So I'm going to challenge you to kind of look ahead for a moment. If the right partners were able to step in, what would you build next? And what kind of support would make the best and biggest difference for you?
Yeah, so I, from a research perspective, would love someday to do an exhibition that would showcase the work of these designers who upcycled quilts and really bring their voices to life in a much more public venue. And also to bring to life the story of maybe why and why we shouldn't do it, to discuss both sides of this. So why it's controversial, why it's part of slow fashion, how this can be sort of a tool for the future. So if there was a museum or curators who'd be interested in helping with that process, that would be really fantastic. When it comes to students and our curriculum, I've talked a lot about materials. And unfortunately, with the closure of Joann Fabrics, materials is something our students can no longer access in Corvallis. It's a huge problem for us. So it's a barrier for them to learn and to grow as designers because they no longer have access to materials. They have to drive to Portland, and that's like 2 hours away. They might not have a car. It's not convenient for anybody. So if we're looking for partners or collaborators to help us support the students in getting access to more materials, like we want to build a library of them that either they can access on campus or they can go to and say, okay, I'm looking to buy something online, but I can look at your materials and figure out, okay, well, this is what 10-ounce denim is. Now I know what I'm buying. I'm buying the right thing. So either donations, collaborators, like support with like micro grants to help them buy materials, things like that would have a huge impact on our program and help us to continue to sort of support this focus on the materials and the design process.
Yeah, thank you. So this has been really great. Thank you for talking with me about this today. I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions here in a second. I've got several of my own that I would love to ask. But before we do that, I'd love to hear if you have any final thoughts that you want to leave with that kind of brings us all back together here, specifically people who care about sustainable design and stronger communities.
Yeah, so I have a quote from my favorite podcast. It's the Clothes Horse Podcast by Amanda Lee McCarty, and it focuses on sort of sustainability and slow fashion. And she always says, progress, not perfection. So instead of focusing on trying to do all the things and be sustainable in all the places, pick one where you can make an impact and lean into that. Otherwise you get overwhelmed and there's too many things. So find some way in which you can support sustainable design in your way and do that. That would be my biggest advice.
Great. Thank you, Colleen. This has been a very thoughtful, engaging conversation. Now we're going to shift into the interactive portion of today's event. And so for the audience here, this is your moment to join us, engage in the dialogue directly. If something that you've sprung to mind as you've listened to us talk today, now is your time to dive deeper into that. So I'd ask that you please use Zoom's Q&A feature to share your questions and or reflections, and to give the folks a chance to kind of brainstorm a little bit and put their questions in the chat. I'm going to get us started with the first question. So if sustainability isn't part of a brand's story, is it really designing for the future or is it just for now?
Yeah. I don't see sustainability as a trend. To me, A, it's something that has always existed. We just didn't call it sustainability. And B, if we want to continue forward, if businesses want to be able to be successful in the future, I think they need to look into sustainability in some way. And like I said before, it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be the whole cradle to cradle sort of life cycle of a product. But even if a brand is doing something small, like using more sustainable materials, using dead stock fabrics, finding some way to work and support locally and local communities. Sustainability is not just about materials and processes, it's about people. So paying people what they're worth, paying factory workers what they're worth, valuing labor and people as well. So I don't see it as a trend. I see it as something that brands need to do in order to be successful in the future. It's also what the younger generations are interested in. So if you want to capture their attention, you need to find some way to express how you're being sustainable, but in a meaningful way. Don't like greenwash anything, really be intentional with what does your brand stand for. And I think that's really the only way brands are going to be successful in the future.
Yeah, I love that response. There's a lot of different angles that you can approach it from. We're unique as a college of business in the fact that we have design faculty among us, and I think it helps us change the way that we think in every respect, and that same mindset can be applied to sustainability. I think that's a really great bit of advice.
Yeah.
So we have a question from one of our audience members. They say, I think of quilts as being more common among an older generation. How do younger students relate to quilts and quilting? And do you see any differences with how different generations relate to this craft form?
That's a really good question. So I think it's actually a misconception that quilts are really seen by just an older generation. There is a new kind of movement, it's called the Modern Quilt Guild, and actually a lot of my quilts fall into this more modern space where we're sort of changing the design elements of a quilt, but at the end of the day, it's still the same thing. And there's been a resurgence of quilting. The pandemic actually kind of sadly helped with this, bring back interest in crafts and sewing, crochet, all of those sorts of things, and quilting. So there are a ton of young people who are quilting and enjoying it and finding a new way to do it. And it might be a little bit different. It might look a little bit different, but quilts have always changed throughout time. The designs of things have always changed. So it's just sort of a new look for them to some extent. But a lot of them are interested in history as well and wanting to learn about the history of quilts and quilt making and the history of women. So it's coming back. I think quilt making is in a really strong place right now in terms of like cultural relevance and interest.
Great. Yeah, there's a whole lot of people that are engaged in spaces that you may not necessarily know until you're actually operating in that space again. And the pandemic is a great example of a context that has allowed people to maybe explore hobbies that they wouldn't have had a chance to otherwise.
Yeah.
Here's our next question. So speaking to your call for action earlier, I love this.
Yes.
What is the process for donating fabric and supplies to your students? How can people who are listening today get involved?
They can just email me. Find my information on the Oregon State website, email me, and we'll figure something out. We love donations. We appreciate so much when people donate. Actually, most of the materials we have for our students come through donations and supplies. And I don't think people understand how impactful that stuff is on our program because it's just right now we have no way of getting it. So it makes a big difference for our program and our students. So send me an email. I'd love to talk to you.
So we'll make sure that we send out Colleen's contact information as well. Colleen Pokorny, if you want to look her up. She's excited and willing to get engaged. You can contact me as well. I'm Jay Hardy. I'm the Associate Dean for Research here. I'm happy to help get you connected through the various outlets that you can. I'm excited to kind of hear that we're able to maybe make some connections here that will assist not just the field of design, but our students here at OSU as well. So next question, can you talk more about the use of natural dyes and hemp materials and how those fit into this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is actually something I'm hoping to move into in the future. So I am really interested in exploring how we can use hemp textiles potentially in the field of quilt making. There's been a resurgence of interest of different materials, so like bringing linen back into quilt making, and I think hemp textiles would be a really great venue for this. So I want to look at getting a bunch of hemp textiles into the hands of quilters, have them make quilts out of them, survey their experience using these textiles, and then do a big design exhibition that would showcase these quilts that these quilters have made. I think people really respond to quilts. They understand them, they kind of know how they feel, and they relate to them. And so what better way to change consumer perception of a fabric that's kind of not really had a great perception, that people think is just like burlap sacks and rope. How to change their perception by putting it into a product that people really understand and relate to from like a tactile and emotional standpoint. So that is where I want to go in the future with hemp textiles, and natural dyeing can always be a part of that. That's a big part of our program. We have an awesome natural dye lab, and we love having our students get involved and engaged in that space.
Yeah, this is a major point of emphasis for our own university that you'll slot into very nicely. We've got huge initiatives here at Oregon State that touch pretty much every college. College of Engineering, College of Ag, College of Business are all involved in this project, and it shows just how big these problems can be and how creative we can be as an institution toward solving them. Next question. Are there opportunities for students from outside the School of Business to get involved in the faculty's upcycling or sustainable fashion projects?
Yes, sure. If students are interested in getting involved in our research, they can reach out to us. We often end up with honors students who are interested in this space, and we love to help direct them in these projects. Also, like our natural dye class, any student can take that class. It's not an apparel design specific course, so any student is welcome from the university to take it. So those are some great ways to get involved in this space. And occasionally we do some larger research projects that maybe we would need student engagement for. So if they're interested, I recommend students just reach out and see kind of what we're up to and what we can do for them.
Great. Well, thanks. Would you please list other podcasts or resources that you listen to? You're very engaged in this space, a lot of really great stories, so that we can learn more about this issue.
Oh, Actually, that's hard because that's the one I mentioned is the only podcast that I listen to at the moment. It's the Clothes Horse podcast. I tend to listen to like completely non-related podcasts otherwise. There are a lot of other great resources that you can find out on the internet for this, or through Instagram. This one actually is putting me on the spot, which is interesting. There's also a lot of other great books. So looking up the work of Kate Fletcher and Alice Payne, who I mentioned earlier, they do a lot of work with sustainability and slow fashion. The slow fashion movement, it would be a great place to look into this and learn more about slow fashion, because that encompasses not just sustainability, but sort of just a whole different process of thinking about how we produce our apparel and our clothing.
Great. And so related to that, what about internationally? Is this going to be something that is unique to the United States? Is it something that's happening in Europe, in East Asia, in Eastern Europe? Is this something that you can see growing, or is it already there?
It's already there. Like I said, the upcycling is not new. It's existed forever. I think a lot of what we see in Japanese textiles really responds well to upcycling. There's some traditional techniques there where they are taking pieces of kimono or other things and layering them and resewing them. So there's historic precedents there in other places. Whether or not other countries are taking quilts and upcycling them, I can't speak to that. I know that does exist somewhat in the UK and in Canada. But upcycling textiles in other countries, yes, that happens. There is precedence for that. People upcycling like cashmere shawls and turning them into jackets, that has happened. So it's there. Upcycling is happening. We're using our material culture in new and different ways, which is very exciting, but does introduce this sort of tension about like, well, what happens when we use these things that have a lot of meaning and value, and how does society react to that? And I think it's definitely going to be happening in other countries as well.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but are you seeing a similar reaction in these international contexts? Is it framed differently? Is it treated kind of different from that emotional aesthetic model approach?
That's a good question. I wouldn't have a good answer for you, other than I know in some cultures, upcycling has always just been part of a way of life. And so it is naturally part of the culture, where I think in sort of US and Western society with Industrial Revolution, we walked away from a lot of those techniques and ideas, or they became kind of seen not as something that like higher society was doing, whereas maybe in other cultures they've always maintained that sort of more sustainable ethos and mentality.
Great. Let's see, do we have another question here? So I've got one more for you here. What story do you think future apparel will tell about the society that created it? When they're looking back on this thought leadership series years down the road, kind of the historical perspective of how we're framing this. Kind of open up your crystal ball here for a second. What is the future going to say?
Well, they're probably going to say we were very wasteful
Sure.
with fast fashion and like the excess of clothing that we have. And they're probably, hopefully going to say, did you really need all of that?
Yeah.
Could you have done something a little bit different to have made the world better? I do, though, think about in terms of this upcycling quilts into garments about like, well, what happens in 50 years to these garments? Will they become turned back into quilts or back into textiles when they start to fall apart? Will then they be, pieced back together into something new? And I think that's kind of fun to think about. But I think, unfortunately, where we are today, the future is going to look back on us and say, like, you should have gotten it together sooner. Like, we maybe aren't doing it the right way, and hope that we can figure it out to be doing it more of a sustainable way, because the world needs it.
Yeah. Well, the best time to do that was yesterday, but second best time is today, right?
That's right.
So
That's right.
I think a lot to learn from this. A lot of great calls to action too. I really enjoyed the way that you framed this notion that we're all involved in some ways, and that you can kind of narrow your scope and find where in your own communities, in your own lives, in your own stories, that you can engage in this way that helps kind of bring out not just the sustainability aspect, but also this emotional and aesthetic piece, which can contribute to well-being and community, all the beautiful concepts that we've talked about here today. All right, here's the next one. What's one technology or material innovation do you wish every design student would experiment with?
If I'm talking about purely apparel design students, because that is sort of my wheelhouse, I would actually say, and we're already doing this in our curriculum, if we're talking about innovations, is our ability to now do 3D design. So we have 3D design software for apparel design. We can take our 2D patterns and we can drape them on a 3D avatar. It's so cool. I didn't get to work with this in the industry, and I'm kind of bummed I missed it. But the power of this is actually, it kind of helps with sustainable production because we don't have to prototype as many physical garments. We can prototype in 3D now. We can also have a lot more accessibility to diverse avatars and diverse body shapes. And so we're able to create garments, hopefully, that don't require as much material production on the front end. We can get to the end goal faster without using as much material, without shipping things from overseas back and forth, but also allow us to design for more people and maybe more custom design so that garments will last longer. And so I really hope all apparel design students have an opportunity to get involved with 3D design because it's a very powerful tool.
Great. Yeah, it's a very exciting time, I think, to be at OSU.
Yeah.
You've been experimenting with AI a little bit, and then we've got the new Huang complex coming in that's going to create opportunities just for this, right?
Yeah.
It's really fun to get to jog your brain and think about what the possibilities might be. And so this is a fantastic one, something we've never really had access to, at least at scale.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to kind of see where you take it and see where your students take it as well. All right, next question. When you look at a student's collection, what makes you more excited? Is it their technical mastery or a daring concept?
This is tough. As a technical designer, usually technical mastery, because that is what I love. I love construction details, and I love seeing how garments come together, and I love seeing students understand that process. That being said, I do love a daring concept, but it has to be executed well. It can't just be daring to be daring. Like, you got to do the whole thing. So technical mastery is something I like seeing because it does show a full understanding of the design process. Whether or not that student is ever going to sew in the industry or not, it shows that they understand how materials and construction and fit all relate to creating a quality product. And that's really what we need these days, is quality products that last a long time as opposed to disposable things that fall apart right away.
Yeah. A lot of steps in the process, right? From ideation all the way to implementation.
Yes.
The real true master designer is going to have mastery over the full process. And I again, to return to your quilt behind you, you need every bit of it, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a little bit of human ingenuity. It takes a little bit of expertise as well. And so I love your response because they're all important.
Yep.
Right? You can't really choose one or the other.
Yeah.
All right, our final question for today. Ooh, I love this. If clothing were treated as a language, what would you say is the most powerful word that designers have at their disposal?
They were treated as a language. Let me say it's most powerful. I would say that designing something that is meant to last and is quality and is made from materials that are natural and are, will last a long time. And I think designing something with intentionality that is meant to last and fits a body correctly is the most powerful thing. Showing that I'm okay knowing that you're going to own this for 10 or 15 years, and you might not come back to me in 10 years until 10 more years to buy another product. But that is really powerful to say, no, I'm strong. I know this design is good. It is a quality product. You are going to be happy with it. And it is going to last, and it is going to survive. And I think that is a very powerful thing that designers should be looking at, as opposed to focusing so much on trends and staying up to date with, whatever is the newest sort of trend and thing that is out there.
Yeah, I love that answer, right? It's something that maybe we've lost a little bit, but that's coming back into vogue, and that it's a beautiful direction that hopefully we can use as our ideal. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you so much to our audience for engaging with us. Fantastic questions. As I was alluding to earlier, we really do look forward to hosting you again. We've enjoyed having you here. Hope to see you again at a future Thought Leadership event series in the new year. If you would ever like to revisit any of our other thought leadership talks, please, you can access them on our website. A lot of different topics, a lot of wide breadths of expertise. There should be a link in the chat that you can use to look through some of our prior presentations and keep an eye out for future ones as well. Thank you so much. Go Beavs.